Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Jess and today I've got another book recommendation video for you. So it's going to be Enemies to Lovers, but the fantasy version. And I think it's going to be a bit longer than I thought it was going to be originally. So I wrote out a list of all the books that I was going to recommend today. And then when I came up here, I forgot about this little corner of the room that we've got filled with loads of books that I used to read a couple years ago, and it just reminded me of loads more of these books that I could recommend. So I don't know if you can see, I've got a few piles behind me here. So I've got my original list, which I'm going to tell you about, and then these ones. So get yourself a cup of tea or something and settle in because it's going to be a bit of a long one. So yeah, I'll get started.
Okay, I thought I'd just interrupt to show you this corner where we keep all these books because there are so many here from when I was younger. Most of them are mine that I've passed to my sister because this is now my sister's room and they're just kept in there. But I just thought it would be fun to have a look in here, and maybe I should do a video where I just go through all of these old books. They're not even that old, but I haven't looked at them in ages, so I can't even remember what's in here anymore. Let me turn you around. So it's this shelf here. This is the main bookshelf here. And basically, that doesn't look that tall, right? But behind it, there's two more piles like that. And then we go up here. So this is all DVDs, obviously not books. But behind, there's even more books. That's the first pile there, then another pile behind. It literally just goes back really far. So yeah, what you can see there isn't even all of them. And I just thought maybe I should just go through them all. That would be such an interesting book, an interesting video, because there's so many in here that I haven't looked at or even thought about in so long. Yeah, maybe I'll do that. But yeah, anyway, back to the book recommendation video. I'm just going to set you up again.
So first we've got The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle Jensen. So this book follows a girl called Lara, and she lives in a world where there's many different kingdoms, as the title of the book would suggest, and her dad is the king of one of these kingdoms, so she essentially is a princess. And since she was born, her and her sisters have been brought up and trained to be assassins, so they've been taught all these fighting skills. And now that she's older, her dad, the king, is sending her off to a rival kingdom called the Bridge Kingdom. It's called the Bridge Kingdom because they own this bridge where a lot of trade passes over it, so it's really vital to everyone. It's like an important kingdom to be. They have a lot of control and power. He's sending her off there to marry that new king. Under the pretense of marriage, she's actually there to kill him. And I actually really like these books where the girl is a real badass girl who's been taught to fight for herself, and she's really strong, even though in this one it's a bit morally shady. That's the type of female character that I like. And this is one of my favourites. I really enjoyed the story, but I have read since that a lot of people recommend it as being a spicy Enemies to Lovers, and I just didn't get that at all, compared to some of the others that I've read. So I wouldn't go in there with expectations for that. It's more about the story and the strategy between the different kingdoms. There's quite a lot of betrayal and back and forth and enemies to lovers to enemies to lovers. So I really like this one. So next up we've got The Ash Princess by Sebastian, and this is a series as well, so this is the first one. So in this book we follow Theodosia. I'm not sure if I've said that right, but basically when she was 6, her country was invaded and she was the princess, her mother was the queen, and her mother was killed, and the Kaiser of this opposing country came and kidnapped her, and since then, since she was 6, she's lived as a prisoner. Everything was taken from her, so her name was taken from her, her language, she's not allowed to speak her home language anymore. Everyone just really looks down on her, isn't allowed to speak to her, so she's kept captive. And then I thought I'd read this quote from the blurb on Goodreads because I feel like it kind of sums up the themes quite well. So this says, "One night the Kaiser forces her to do the unthinkable. With blood on her hands and all hope of reclaiming her throne lost, she realises that surviving is no longer enough. But she does have a weapon. Her mind is sharper than any sword, and power isn't always won on the battlefield. For 10 years, the Ash Princess has seen her land pillaged and her people enslaved. That all ends here." So I love a book where it's someone reclaiming their power back, coming into their own strength. Yeah, anyway, I just really like books like that. But I would read the trigger warnings for this one because it is quite dark. There's quite a few dark themes, like when they're describing what happened when people took over her country. It's a bit of a darker, older one, I'd say. So next we've got The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. So this book is about a kingdom where every night the caliph or caliph, I'm not exactly sure how it's said, basically the man in charge of the kingdom, takes a different girl each night, and by the morning the girl is always dead, and it's like a tradition. We follow this one girl who, her friend has just been killed in this way, so she decides to put herself forward, be one of these girls that goes and spends the night with him. But she's determined to break the tradition and not be killed. As it's going on, she finds out more about him, like the reasons why he has to do this, that there's more to him basically, and he's a more human person than she thought. And I did read it a while ago, so I can't remember exactly, but I just remember having the feeling that the series ended quite abruptly. Like if it was a longer book, it would have been even better. But there is another book, which I haven't read, like the second in the series, so obviously if I read that, it probably would have made more sense, and it was my own fault. But yeah, so that's that one. Next we've got A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. This one is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and we follow this prince called Prince Ren. He's been cursed to repeat the autumn of his 18th birthday. Everyone in the kingdom has now been scared off because for years this beast has been coming out at night, obviously like Beauty and the Beast, scared all the villagers away. So the only people that are left are the prince and his one main guard. And this guard this night is like his best friend and is determined to break this curse for him. So every year he brings him a new girl from the mortal world, because it's said that a new girl will break this curse if he falls in love. Obviously, like everyone kind of knows that that's the story. And so this obviously follows like the one girl that's brought in this time who finally there's something different about her, but he's so closed off, like he doesn't want to get to know anyone, and after years of it failing he's kind of given up. So he's like really moody, and that's where like the enemies to lovers comes in. But I really like the addition of like having the guard, like the knight there. He was like a really nice character, and I think some of the other books in the series, because it's a series, focus on him more, so that would be nice to read. I would say that I found this one a little bit younger than some of the ones that I've read, but it was still a really good book, and it's actually written by an author that I really like, and I'm going to talk about another one of her series in these books behind me here, so I'll get to those in a bit. Next we've got Frostblood by Elly Blake. This book is set in a kingdom where there's two types of people. There's Firebloods who have the power of fire, and Frostbloods who have the power of ice. And Frostbloods are the ruling class, and they've basically almost killed out all the Firebloods, almost to extinction. And in this book we follow a girl called Ruby, who is a Fireblood, and after her mum is killed in front of her, she's basically left to her own devices, but she gets taken in by a group of Frostbloods who, although they are part of the ruling class, they don't agree with all of the cruelty that the people in power are like imposing on the city. They're like the good Frostbloods, if that makes sense, and they're trying to fight back. So they take Ruby in because they see her as like a valuable asset, as well as like wanting to help her. They teach her to bring out her inner fire and like use her power. This is where she meets Arcus, who is a Frostblood. They don't get on at all to start with, but he's the one who's like teaching her about her powers. But before they manage to like carry out the plan and everything, Ruby is captured by the people in charge of the city. She's made to participate in this almost like a Hunger Games type of tournament. Only one person like goes into the ring at a time, but they're up against beasts and stuff. And that's another thing that I like, because I obviously loved the Hunger Games like most people, so if anything like resembles that slightly, I'm like, ooh. This one isn't like spicy at all. I think they only like kiss once maybe. It's more about the story and the world building and like the magic side of it, but the relationship was still cute. Oh, and it's a series as well, so that's good if you're wanting more than one book to read. Next we have The Shadows Between Us by Tricia Levenseller. I hope I say some of these names right and I'm not getting them all wrong. In this book we are in a society which is ruled by a king who is surrounded by shadows all the time. No one really knows like what the shadows do, but no one's allowed to touch him at all. So it's all like shrouded in secrecy, like why is he surrounded by these shadows all the time and what do they do? No one knows. And we're following Alessandra, who is on a mission to basically go up in society. She wants to do well for herself, and in her mind the way to do that is to court the king, and basically her mission is to kill him. So she's quite power hungry, and that was quite a different dynamic to read almost. And actually actually, I'm going to find the first sentence of this book because it's one that quite a few people quote a lot because it's quite like in your face and really sets the tone for the book. Okay, so the first line goes, "They've never found the body of the first and only boy who broke my heart, and they never will." So straight away you're like, oh my god, this girl is quite ruthless. So I did enjoy that element to it. Yeah, it's a common theme. I've probably said it before, but I like women who, even though sometimes the morals are a bit sketchy, like it's just nice to see someone who isn't just like a rollover, like damsel in distress. Like that can be nice, but it's nice just to mix it up a bit with some of these like strong women. So yeah, even though she is out to kill someone, so that probably isn't the best representation. But anyway, and this one was a standalone. So if you're just wanting something quick, just one where you don't have to buy the whole series, then go for this one. But I did feel like I would have enjoyed it if they'd gone deeper, like I would have enjoyed a series, but oh well. So next we've got Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. So this is a book about a world where witches exist, but they're hunted by everyone. So the main character, Lou, is a witch, but she's given up her magic to stay undercover for her own safety. And she crosses paths with this guy called Reed, who is a chaucer of the church. His job, his only rule that he's ever lived by, is that witches should be killed and they need to be hunted down. So he's one of the people going after the witches, and Lou is a witch. And then basically they end up in this forced marriage, and she knows what he is, but he doesn't know that she's a witch. So there's an extra element of like, they don't even want to be married in the first place. And then she's also terrified because this guy that she's just married is one of the people that's out to kill her. And it is a series, but I haven't read the next one. I keep putting it off because I've read a lot of things saying it didn't live up to people's expectations after the first one. So I haven't read it yet, so I can't say how the rest of the series goes. But I did enjoy this one. It wasn't like 5 stars, it wasn't 1 star, it was like in the middle. It was a good book. And then before we go on to all of these other books that I've now discovered and want to mention, there was 2 other books which I thought it wouldn't really be an enemies to lovers fantasy video if I didn't include them, but I try not to be too boring in these videos and just say books that everyone's already heard before. So I'm not going to go into full detail, I'm just going to quickly give you the names in case you haven't heard of them. But the first one is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. And so yeah, most people have already heard of this series before. It's all over BookTube and has been for years. But it's basically about this girl who gets captured and taken to a fairy kingdom. She realises that her captor is more than he seems. He's basically in charge, the king. I can't remember, I haven't read this series in so long, but I thought I'd just put it in there just on the off chance that you've never heard of it. And then the next one is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This one is about a girl called Poppy. Just really quickly, she's a maiden, so she's lived her whole life alone basically. She can't be touched, she can't be spoken to, and then she's assigned this new guard. She kind of starts to form a connection with him. He's called Hawk, and it turns out there's more to him than first appears. And this has got the same amount of hype as ACOTAR, which is A Court of Thorns and Roses, by the way, if you hear anyone say that. And the newest book has literally just come out. So if you're wanting a series to get into, which is new and all the hype now, then this is the series to go for. So that leads me on really nicely to talk about another series, which is by Jennifer L. Armentrout. And this is one of the first series she ever started to write. And it begins with Obsidian. I've got the first 4 here, but there's even more after this. So it's a full series if you want to read it. And I remember I read this like quite a few years ago when I was very first getting into reading. This was my first book boyfriend that I would picture. The guy in it, called Damon, was just everything. Yeah, it might seem a little bit young now if I went back and read it, but I think I'd still really enjoy it. And the enemies to lovers is mainly in the first one because that's when they first meet. I should say a bit about it actually. Him and his siblings are this race almost like aliens. They have powers and stuff. That sounds really sci-fi-y, and it isn't really like that because I'm not a massive fan of sci-fi books, but I really enjoyed these. And basically there's this secret like organisation after them trying to eliminate them, and he meets this girl called Kat who moves in across the road from him. So they're neighbours. At first really hate each other because he's just really horrible to her, and then it's enemies to lovers. So and guess what kind of happens. But I just really loved this series. It was one of my original favourite series. Sorry, the light's going a bit as well because I'm using like natural light, so I'll try and be really quick so we can finish this before it gets really dark. So next, if you remember when I talked about A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I said that I'd come back to another one of that author's series, Brigid Kemmerer. This is it. It's the Elemental series. And again, I've reread this series like maybe 3 times now since I first read it when I was younger. These are all books that like really got me into reading, but I would still enjoy them now. I never hear people talk about a series like this, and I don't know if it's because they're marketed as being quite young, but I really enjoy them. And so yeah, this really got me into her as an author as well. Basically, the series is about a group of brothers, and they all have different powers relating to the elements. So like one is fire, one is air, one is water, one is earth, etc, etc. Each book is about a different brother finding their person, like getting into a relationship and stuff. So it is a bit predictable in that way. I just remember loving these. I really got a good appreciation for the author after this, because especially in Spark, this book, the brother that she writes in this, he's so angry. Like, you've seen him in the books beforehand, but he's so angry at the world. He's just really frustrated, but you love him as a character even though he's so angry, and it comes out as being horrible to other people. She writes emotions so well that you put yourself in that situation and you feel like how angry the character is, and they're lashing out, and you don't hate them because of it. After I read this series, I then went on to read this one, which isn't Enemies to Lovers. I might actually mention this in another video that I'm going to do, because I think I want to do a video about couples where they're like writing letters to each other and don't know who the other one is. So I think I've mentioned that before. I will save this book until that video. Next, we've got Sweet Evil by Wendy Higgins. And as you can see, there's more than one book in this series. And I never hear anyone talk about this either, and I don't know why, because it is such an original idea. We follow a group of Nephilim, I think that's the word. Basically, they're children of dukes, who each duke has a power from a different sin, if that makes sense. So like the deadly sin. We're following their children who have inherited these sins and have to do the dirty work across the world. So for example, if their sin is addiction, the children are sent out by the dukes to go and encourage people to take drugs, drink alcohol, get addicted to substances. But these children, they look like humans, so the humans don't realise that they're among them. That's a bit of a rubbish explanation, because I'm just doing it off the top of my head, like from what I can remember. But yeah, I just really enjoyed this series, and I thought it'd be a shame if I didn't throw ones like these in there, because they're just something a bit different. Then next we've got The Dark Heroine by Abigail Gibbs, and she also has done a second book as well to go with this. And I remember I bought this originally because I read that it was about vampires, and it had this like black edging to the book. And back when I was trying to like fulfill the Twilight shaped hole in my heart, this was everything I needed. So basically it follows a girl called Violet, and she's kidnapped off the street by a group of vampires. She's been taken because her dad is high up in the British political scene, and so she's basically taken as like a bargaining chip, because these vampires live in British society. It's set in Britain, by the way, which was a nice change, because I feel like I do read a lot of books set in America, which doesn't necessarily matter, but anyway. And I just loved this one. Fun fact which I just wanted to add about these is that I read that she started writing these when she was literally like 16 or something like that, like on a Wattpad style site, and then it got picked up. Like everyone loved it so much that she ended up getting it published. I just thought it was amazing, the fact that she wrote the first book when she was so young. Because on here it's got Dinner with a Vampire, which was like her original name for it, and then when it got published, like she came up with this new name. Oh yeah, it actually says here in the front of the book, it says, at age 15, she began posting serially online under the pseudonym Cans12, and after 3 years in the internet limelight, sets her sight towards total world domination. But yeah, imagine being 15 and you've already started writing your debut novel, which is going to go on to like sell loads and loads of copies. Like, what a girl boss. And again, no one ever talks about them. I don't know if it's because they're a bit older, but I thought these were all good additions to the fantasy Enemies to Lovers. Some of them, like this series, not every book is Enemies to Lovers, but it's still romance and fantasy. And just fitted in really well. I hope that gave you a new book to read if you were struggling to find one. I feel like there's a lot of choice in there, and like always I've been trying to give recommendations that I don't see everywhere. So let me know if you've read any of these. I'd love to hear what you think about them, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!